Hello. Hi guys, hi, good evening. We're going to start very shortly, so if you're able just to grab a drink if you need one and grab a seat, that'd be great. Well, good evening. Really nice to have you with us. Thank you for joining us tonight, and I'm sure it'll be a really engaging and enjoyable evening. Just very warm welcome, whether you're here as a regular to this church or whether you've just come tonight as a friend with someone else. Whoever you are, you're very welcome. I'm Mark Campbell. I'm one of the members of the church here, and I'm going to introduce Andrew, who's our speaker tonight, shortly. And I'm going to ask him just a couple of quick questions just to help us to get to know him just a little bit. But I think, just before I do that, I think what we want to do as a church is to realize that there's certain areas within faith or science or other thoughts that's actually just quite, seems to be in conflict quite a lot of the time. And what we want to do in evenings like tonight is just to demonstrate that in a thoughtful, hopefully an intelligent and respectful way, of actually just how science and faith fit together. You'll all have your own experience of that. You'll all have your own questions about that. But we would like to, whoever you are, engage well with you. We would like you to have the opportunity to think about faith, and particularly about the faith in the person of Jesus and who he is and what that means for you. And we want to do that tonight as we structure around about science and how actually this sort of provocative question about science and faith. So we hope you have a really good evening as you come tonight and you enjoy that. As I say, we think this is important to engage thoughtfully, intelligently in these sort of issues. And last year we had a professor of biology who defended his position as a scientist and as a Christian. And I'm going to get my phone out, if you excuse me, because Andrew's given me some credentials to read. And I'm feeling slightly underqualified here. So let me just see if I can actually operate this. Okay. Yeah, last year we had a professor of evolutionary biology speaking in defense of the Christian faith. This year, in Andrew's opinion, not mine, we've taken it down a little bit with Andrew just being a doctor. He read natural sciences at St John's College in Cambridge, and then he did a PhD in auditory neuroscience at the University of York. So in my eyes, fairly well qualified. He's now a minister in Greenwich in London. And I'm going to just pass over to him. He's obviously the main speaker tonight. But Andrew, can I just invite you up to introduce you and to welcome you?
Hello.
It's been really nice to meet Andrew briefly tonight, but you're here obviously to speak about science and faith. Mm-hmm. And we look forward to that. And you look quite a scientific person. I'm not sure if that's a laugh of agreement or not. But tell us about, you live in quite an interesting place. What is it scientifically interesting about the place that you live?
Well, I live in Greenwich in southeast London, which you know because of Greenwich Mean Time and the 0-degree longitude line, which actually goes through the middle of my house. So that's the most interesting fact. But the most interesting thing about Greenwich, I think, is the Longitude Prize, which was a prize by King George III for people to make the most accurate clock at the time. Because if you wanted to calculate longitude at sea, you need to know the time. You can find out latitude pretty easily. You want to know longitude, you need to know sort of where you are relative to midday. And the trouble is that pendulum clocks, when you take them on a boat, don't work very well, because as the boat goes side to side, the pendulum goes kind of a bit wonky, and so clocks which are notoriously inaccurate. So the king put up this money for a longitude. It's quite a good story. You may have heard George Harrison. There was a whole load of distinguished clockmakers and engineers who all did pretty rubbishly, and he was a very humble sort of clockmaker, He hadn't got any kind of aristocratic background, but he was just really good at engineering. And he, in designing his clock, made 2 other scientific inventions. So he realized that the temperature affected the length of the pendulum slightly, so that was no good. So then he invented the bimetallic strip to cope with that, which is now the basis of all thermostats. It's pretty cool. And then he realized there was a bit too much friction on the axle, so he invented the ball bearing race to cope with friction on the axle. So 2 major inventions just to get really accurate in his clock. And his clock was, it was about 1 second every month or something it went off, which is about 100 times more accurate than the next competition. But because he was a nobody, they refused to give him the prize because he wasn't an aristocrat. And eventually the king just said, for goodness sake, give this man the prize. So it's got a good engineer comes from Greenwich.
Brilliant, thank you. Well, after my slow introduction, I think everyone's now awake, and you realise you have to pay attention tonight. So, but also, you're a minister, and I guess people see you as quite responsible, hopefully. But can you tell us, have you ever done anything irresponsible in the name of science?
Yeah, I've got 2 stories about this. One happened in Singapore, and one happened in Glasgow. So the one in Singapore, when I grew up, the reason I wanted to do science was, partly because my stepfather was a scientist, and he described these amazing chemistry experiments that he did when he was a boy. And so me and my stepbrother, we really wanted to copy him and make this thing called nitrogen triiodide, if there's any chemists here. It's basically a substance that is so unstable that it explodes on touch. So you can make a very thin layer of it and leave it on the stairs or something, and someone treads on it, it goes bang. We thought, this sounds amazing. But unfortunately, by the time we tried, it was impossible to buy any of the chemicals that you needed because, restricted, people worried about making explosives and bomb factories and so on. So, but then I got the opportunity when I went to Singapore. My dad was living in Singapore, and I went there, and I could buy the chemicals I needed, so obviously I did. And I'll tell you how to make it in case you get the chance. You get iodine crystals, which you can't buy because it's a registered poison. You grind them really small with a pestle and mortar, and then you mix it with 880 ammonia, and then filter it. That's all you have to do. And the stuff left over on the filter paper is nitrogen triiodide. So I went to Singapore, bought some of this stuff. I was volunteering in a school, and as a science teacher, I thought I'll show them how cool science is. I'll make this explosive. And I did make some, and I made a bit too much of it. And fortunately, I was practicing it over the lunch hour, and it detonated when I was the only one in the room. But I couldn't really hear anything for the next 20 minutes or so. So that was a bit responsible. But then more recently in Glasgow, I was actually speaking kind of related to this subject, whether it makes most sense to be agnostic in the face of science and faith and so on. And I was trying to do a water into wine miracle. I obviously can't actually turn water into wine, but with the aid of phenolphthalein, some of you know what that is, I could make it look like I'd turn water into wine. And so, I had a jug of water on the table at the front, and a glass that had a little smear of sodium hydroxide in it. And I poured the water into the glass, and it changed colour. It went red. But unfortunately, it turns out that somebody was a bit thirsty and was walking along and said, "Oh, there's a jug of water. I'll have a glass of that," and poured some. Let's just say it wasn't really water. And so I was thinking, oh my goodness, are they going to be okay? And I looked it up later, and it turns out that phenolphthalein used to be prescribed as a laxative by doctors. But I think there was no serious ill effects afterwards. So there we are.
Great, thank you. So don't take a drink next to Andrew. Thank you very much for that. We're looking forward to tonight, and Andrew's going to give us the main presentation tonight. And the theme is, Does Science Disprove God? And I'm sure it'll be a really interesting evening, but I'm sure it'll be provoking in terms of questions, and you maybe won't cover everything that you would like to ask. So there is a QR code that will come up for Slido. If you want to connect onto that, you can ask any question. We'll have about 15-20 minutes of questions towards the end if there's a desire and appetite for that. So if you'd like to ask questions, please just put that on that. And if you don't want to ask a question but you agree with the questions, then vote for them, and they'll go to the top, and then we'll cover them kind of nearer the end of the evening. But that's all from me. I'm going to pass over to Andrew to take us through the main part of the evening. So thank you.
Thanks very much. Thank you. Well, thanks for coming and letting me address this question, does science disprove God? I love this, by the way. I think this is liquid crystal, is it, or something like that? I've actually got a little panel like this on one of my windows at home just because I thought it was fun. So I can, just by passing a current through it, you can make it go opaque, and it can go clear as well. I'm into geeky, sciencey things, and I never used to be into Jesus things. In fact, I thought the two were incompatible. So when I started at university, age 18, some time ago, 1993, you can work out my age, I actually wrote a poem to express my contempt for Christianity. And it wasn't a very good poem because I was a science student, not an English student, but I can still remember it, and it goes like this. Some folk seem to find it odd that people grow from tiny cells. Pathetic those who think of God and still drop coins in wishing wells. There we are. That was my literary output, my contribution to English poetry. But I just thought, surely nowadays it's time to grow up. The idea of believing in God now was like people who threw money into a well, made a wish, and honestly expected the outcome to be different tomorrow, when I knew, and any sensible person knew, that the council comes along once a week and harvests all the pound coins out the bottom. I mean, sure, people used to think that it rained because God had a great watering can in the sky, but then we came to figure out evaporation and condensation, the water cycle. People used to think that you got ill because of demons, and you got better because of miracles. But then we figured out bacteria and viruses and helper T cells and immunoglobulin. And I mean, surely nowadays, now we've sequenced the human genome, now we've put people on the moon, it's time to grow up a bit and leave behind these superstitions. So I thought, aged 18. About a month after writing that poem, I became a Christian. And everything changed. And it's a long story. I won't go into all the details. But basically what happened is I met people at university who didn't fit my stereotype of religious people. So I would never have been this rude to their face, but I thought that Christians were gullible hypocrites, basically. Gullible because I'd never heard anyone give me a reason why I should believe it, and hypocrites because I read the scandal, same as you do. The Archbishop of Canterbury resigns last week and all of these terrible things. And I read about those things and I thought, look, religion is just hypocrisy and it's based on nothing. But I met some Christians at university and they weren't gullible. They had real reasons for what they thought. Some of them were much cleverer than I was. And they weren't hypocrites because they actually followed Jesus with integrity, and it was very intriguing. And basically I got talking to them, and as a result of quite a long process, I became a Christian. But at that point, I became the thing that the modern atheist says that you can't be. I became a both-and person. I was now a Christian, and I was still a scientist, or at least still a science student, science undergraduate. Now, the atheist is always telling us that it's got to be either or. Like, if you want to be religious, okay, if you want to throw your brain away, I suppose you're the kind of person who likes art galleries and long walks in the forest. But if you like rationality and logic and science, then I'm afraid you've got to leave that behind. It's got to be either or. It's either fairy tales or logic, and you choose. But you definitely can't be both science and Christian. Well, I was both, science student and Christian. And you might say, okay, big deal. I did a PhD 20 years ago in auditory neuroscience, which sounds cool, but basically it meant persuading people to sit in a soundproof room for a couple of hours and listen to a couple of thousand clicks. And that's the harsh reality of it. A friend of mine was doing a PhD, his brother was doing a PhD, sponsored by Hovis, and he spent the entire Christmas holidays looking at photographs of slices of bread and counting the bubbles, honestly. So that's the reality of it. But, I was never a very senior scientist, but some of my friends are. So last year you had Professor Richard Buggs. He's a professor of evolutionary genomics at Queen Mary at the University of London. And he's a Christian, which is strange, isn't it? Because people say you can't believe in the Bible because of evolution. But Professor Buggs is one of the leading authorities in the UK on evolution, and he believes the Bible. How interesting. You may know that the Francis Collins, the director of the Human Genome Project, the project that was the first to sequence human DNA, he also is a Christian. In fact, he published his book, The Language of God, the very same year that Richard Dawkins published The God Delusion, explaining his own belief that God was not a delusion, but very real. I'm at the age now that some of my friends have gone on to be, quite impressive scientists. One of my cleverest friends at university, I was actually, I didn't really kind of realize how bright he was until when I was doing my PhD, I joined the University of York choir, and I got to know the professor of physics because he was also a bass in the choir. And I said, I'm going to see my friend from Cambridge next week. I don't suppose you know him. He's just a PhD student. He said, what's his name? I said, he's called Peter Haynes. And this professor raised his eyebrows and says, oh, yes, I know about Peter Haynes. And Peter Haynes is now the vice provost, I think, of Imperial College London, an expert in quantum mechanics, and a Christian. I mean, of course, I'm not saying that all serious scientists are Christians, but enough of them are that it kind of challenges the either-or hypothesis. There's enough people who are both and. It makes you wonder whether they might not be as incompatible as sometimes people say. In fact, arguably, modern science came about because of the Christian belief that predominated in Europe in the 16th, 17th, 18th century. So according to Sir Alfred North Whitehead, the historian of science, he puts it this way. He says, man became scientific because he looked for law in nature, but he looked for law in nature because he believed in a lawgiver. In other words, people believed that there was a divine intelligence behind the world. Johannes Kepler, the astronomer, he said that when he looked at the planets, he was thinking God's thoughts after him. You know, there was a God who decided that gravity would work by elliptical orbits. And so Kepler was kind of excited to look for elliptical orbits. Maybe you know what some of these scientists are famous for. Let's do a bit of audience participation. So I'll start with an easy one. Isaac Newton. Gravity, yeah. How about Michael Faraday? Michael Faraday, electromagnetism, electricity, that kind of thing. If you're a chemist, Robert Boyle. Do you remember Boyle's gas laws? If you're a computer scientist, Charles Babbage built the first mechanical computer, difference engine number 1. I think a replica of the second one is in the Science Museum in London. Louis Pasteur. I once said, I was doing this interactive thing, I once said to an audience, Louis Pasteur, what did he invent? And someone said milk. He didn't invent milk, but he was the guy who worked out the reason why milk goes bad was because of organisms that you can't see by the naked eye, but he said maybe there's little animals, which we now know as bacteria, that eat your milk. And he was right. When we got microscopes, we found that he was right. All of these people, leading scientists and also Christians, and partly motivated by their Christian faith. They wanted to understand the world that they believed that God had made. Had people believed in the 16th and 17th century what a lot of people today believe, that the world is just random, it's just accidental, it's just chaotic, it's questionable whether they would have bothered to understand it in the first place. Right? So people thought God has created the world in an orderly way, and so it's worth understanding. And so certainly there's a great pedigree in science of Christians being motivated to do it. Now, of course, nowadays, if you do science, you publish your results in a scientific journal. You don't even have to specify in the journal whether you're an atheist or a Christian or a Hindu or a Muslim, whatever, doing the experiment. It's kind of irrelevant because the scientific method, it's kind of a universal method that anyone can use. And it basically goes like this. You observe the world, you formulate a hypothesis to describe what you observe, and then you test that hypothesis by experiment to try and falsify it. And there's nothing about that methodology that means you have to be an atheist to use it. You know, Hindu scientists use that methodology, Muslim scientists use it, atheist scientists use it, and you don't even have to say which you are when you publish your results. It's just a universal methodology. I don't know anything about that methodology that requires atheism, nor do I know anything established by that methodology that contradicts what's taught in the Bible. I just don't think that kind of conflict exists between the scientific method or between scientific results and the Christian faith. But obviously there is some kind of conflict, otherwise this wouldn't be an interesting question and you probably wouldn't be here tonight. So the question is, where is the conflict then? If the scientific method's kind of neutral, if the history of science, and in fact the universities today are full of atheists and Christians at the top level, then where does this conflict come from? Well, I want to argue tonight it's not a conflict between science and the Bible, but rather it's a conflict between two different worldviews, two different philosophies. To be cheeky, provocative, I'd say between two different faiths. Now, of course, the atheist gets very annoyed if you describe their position as a faith. But it's interesting, you read the work of an atheist like Richard Dawkins, how many times he will assert something without giving scientific grounds for it. I was once in a lecture given by Peter Atkins, the Oxford chemist, who's an atheist. And he said in this lecture that, he said, a scientifically responsible person should not accept as true anything that couldn't be established by scientific experiment. It's an extraordinary thing to say. And I'm afraid I put up my hand to ask a question. I said, Peter Atkins, is it true that you said that we shouldn't accept anything that we couldn't prove by scientific experiment? He said, yes. I said, I'm unable to verify by a scientific experiment that you said that. Did you say that? Should we believe that you said that? It doesn't, I mean, of course, he hasn't lived by that. There's a lot of witnesses to it, but there was no experiment you could do to kind of recover the sound waves of the fact that that had been his utterance. Of course, all of us believe things for all sorts of reasons. And the atheist has a kind of set of beliefs that they cling to, which is in conflict with the Christian set of beliefs. And what I want to do today, in the time we've got available, is to outline these two views of the world. Of course, there's more views beside this. I'm not going to talk about Islam or Hinduism. You're welcome to ask about those in the question time. But I'm just going to talk about these two that often go head to head. I'm going to talk about atheism, naturalism, and Christianity. And then I'm going to do what a responsible scientist ought to do and ask which one makes most sense of the facts, which one makes most sense of the evidence. Okay, so briefly, firstly, atheism or naturalism. Naturalism is the philosophy that says that matter and chance is all that there is. So Carl Sagan, the famous American cosmologist, said in a parody of the Bible saying that God was and is to come, Carl Sagan says the cosmos was and is to come. The cosmos is all there ever was or is or shall be. Just matter and chance. Or in the words of Bertrand Russell, the British philosopher, mankind is nothing but a chance collocation of atoms on a minor speck of interstellar dust. Now, as a scientist, I agree with him that we're made of atoms, and I agree with him that the Earth is a relatively small planet in one solar system amongst many, and one galaxy amongst many. We're small. But according to Bertrand Russell, the key words are we're nothing but that. You can reduce us just to that. We're only that, just atoms and randomness. Or in my own field of neuroscience, Sir Francis Crick, who got the Nobel Prize for working out the helical structure of DNA molecule, he later went on to do sort of neuroscience-y things. He wrote in his book, The Astonishing Hypothesis, he puts it in inverted commas because he's not sure how much the concept of a person really makes sense, actually. But you, the apparent you, your joys and sorrows, your sense of personal identity and free will are, in fact, he says, no more than the behavior of a vast assembly of nerve cells and their associated electrons. Now, again, as a neuroscientist, I agree that our thoughts are connected with our brains and electrical signals, but the key words are no more than. You see, for the naturalist, the point is that everything can be reduced only to that. All that you put into the system is matter and chance, and all you can get out again is matter and chance. And so, we have psychology, we're interacting with each other, but psychology is just reducible to biology, because it's just the behavior of different brains in dialogue with each other. And biology is reducible to chemistry because, biological molecules are just complicated chemical molecules. And chemistry is reducible to physics because they behave the way they do because of the underlying subatomic forces. And physics is reduced to just particles and chance. There's nothing more. Now, that view of the world, that sort of scientific materialism, naturalism, it is in conflict with the view of the Bible, certainly. To give you the view of the Bible, I thought I'd give you it in the Bible's own words rather than kind of my version of Christianity. I thought I'd give you the Bible's version of it. This is from a speech that one of Jesus' followers gave in Athens in the first century, in what was like the first century intellectual capital. So Athens was like the kind of Harvard of ancient Greece, and people used to go there to debate the latest ideas. We're told he got speaking to some Epicurean and Stoic philosophers. The Epicureans were, a bit like the modern scientific atheist and the naturalist. They believed that human life was down to random events. There was no survival beyond the grave. And this is how Paul explains the Christian view, which is very different. He says this: "The God who made the world and everything in it is the Lord of heaven and earth, and does not live in temples built by human hands. He's not served by human hands as if he needed anything. Rather, he himself gives everyone life and breath and everything else." We're just 2 sentences in, but I wonder if you can see, in some ways, Christianity and atheism are like the opposite of each other. This is what I mean. If you said to an atheist, "Does God exist?" they'd say no. But if you say, "Does Christianity exist?" they'd say, "Well, obviously it does." Well, where did Christianity come from? "Oh, we made it up," says the atheist. Because randomness produced a human being, and then millions of years produced a more advanced human being or advanced human society, and then human society produced religion, and religion produced God. So randomness made us, and then we made God in our imagination. And the Bible says that's exactly the opposite of what happened. We start with a God, and in his imagination, he made us. Except it wasn't just his imagination, because he's God, so he had the power to actually do it. The God who made the world and everything in it, he himself gives everyone life and breath and everything else. And then he goes on to say that from one man God made all the nations, that they should inhabit the whole earth. He marked out their appointed times in history, the boundaries of their lands. God did this so that they would seek him and perhaps reach out for him and find him, though he's not far from any one of us. In him we live and move and have our being. As some of your own poets have said, we are his offspring. Well, more of that in a minute. But here's 2 views then of the world. The view one is the world's here by accident. It's only matter and chance. The other view is the world's here because there's a God who made it, who designed it, he sustains it. And the question is, which one makes most sense of the evidence? Right? And I'm going to compare them in 3 ways, and then I'm done, and you can ask questions. Right? So, number 1, which one makes most sense of design? It's a controversial word, of course, because the atheist doesn't believe the world has been designed. It's an accident. Everyone agrees the world looks like it's designed. It doesn't look random. Sir Fred Hoyle, the astronomer, once said that the idea of random chance producing, this, people in a beautiful architectural building who are, at the moment as I'm speaking, there's a little bit in your eardrum that is vibrating in line with the pressure waves coming from my voice through the, let's even leave the PA system out of it. And those pressure waves are converted into electrical signals that go to your brain, which get decoded into words which you understand you're engaging with. I mean, wow. Like, the idea of this coming about by chance would be a bit like saying a whirlwind passed through a junkyard and left behind a fully functioning assembled 747 aircraft. I mean, it's kind of theoretically possible that all the bits of the junkyard could kind of blow themselves together into a plane that could fly to New York. But that really isn't the most likely explanation of why the plane's there, right? But the atheist has a ready answer for it. You see, design, says Richard Dawkins in his book, The Blind Watchmaker, which I had to read just before I went to university, as on the reading list. Design, he puts it in inverted commas, design is only apparent. We have a mechanism to account for it, natural selection. The blind, unconscious, automatic process, which we now know is the explanation for the existence of an apparently purposeful form of all life. It has no purpose in mind. It has no mind, no vision, no foresight, no sight at all. If it can be said to play the role of watchmaker in nature, it is that of the blind watchmaker. So what Richard Dawkins is saying is, evolution has tricked you. It tricked you into thinking that things were purposeful, but actually they were purposeless. It was a random automatic process that produced the apparently purposeful form of life. I don't think that works as an explanation. I want to explain why. So firstly, it doesn't explain why there's a universe at all. So scientists used to believe 150 years ago that the universe was eternal. It's always been here. And the things about things that have always been here is you don't need to explain them. So for example, I could say, why is that music stand there? Why is that music stand still there? It hasn't even moved during this whole talk. That is not a very interesting question, is it, scientifically? It's there because nothing's happened to it. It's like the default state of this music stand is to be there. But if I said, oh, look, entirely randomly and by itself, the music stand went there. No. If something's changed about the music stand, we need an explanation. And they're not very hard to fathom explanations. I picked it up and moved it over there, right? Well, let's imagine this with the universe. If the universe has always been here, you don't need to explain it. It's here because it was here, and it was here because it was here before that. But if the Big Bang theory is true, and scientists universally accept this now, that means the universe didn't used to be here, and now it is. It kind of moved from non-existence to existence. Well, how did that happen? Oh, no reason. Well, that's not good enough, you see. If something's changed, we've got to have a reason. You've got to have a cause. And the atheist hasn't got one. There's nothing outside of the universe to make a universe. And the universe hasn't always been here. So what made the universe go from non-existence to existence? What made the music stand go from here to here? Well, in that case, a human agent. And I'd suggest in the case of the Big Bang, a divine agent. You need someone to make the Big Bang go bang. You can't say, oh, it's evolution, because you haven't even got a universe yet to have evolution in. Secondly, it turns out that when the Big Bang does go bang, it has to go bang in quite a specific way. Or should I say at quite a specific speed. Turns out, if the universe had gone bang too quickly, it would spread out so much that you get no stars. You just have gas, hydrogen gas, spread out over the whole universe. So it's got to be slow enough for stars to form. But if it goes too slowly, then gravity overcomes it, and just after it's gone bang, the whole thing gets sucked in on itself and goes crunch, and you get a big bang and a big crunch even before you got 1 millisecond on your stopwatch. In order to have any kind of big bang that produces planets and lasts longer than a nanosecond, the ratio of the expansion and contraction forces has to be exactly right to within 1 part in 10 to the 70. 1 in 10 with 70 zeros on the end, which is really not very likely. I mean, somebody worked out an analogy which I thought was quite fun. Imagine covering the Earth with 5-penny pieces tessellated and then stacking them to a height of the distance between here and the moon, 380,000 kilometers away. Okay, so imagine this massive column of 5pp's across the whole surface of the Earth, stacked as high as the moon. Paint one of them red with nail varnish, blindfold your wife or your husband, get him to pick one at random. That's about 1 in 10 to the 70. In other words, it's really quite unlikely. Understatement. To have a universe at all requires a cause, and the atheist hasn't got a cause. But you've got to have a big bang that happens at the right speed. So you've got to have an intelligent, designing kind of cause. And then I'll argue, in order to have a universe with morality or personality in it, you've got to have a moral, personal, powerful, immaterial cause. You've got to have something a bit like God. And this isn't an evolution argument. This is even before you have a universe at all. And then, well, evolution is even more difficult, isn't it? Because to get evolution going, you've got to have a molecule capable of copying itself and passing on information to another molecule. You need to have, at minimum, RNA. RNA is one of the most complicated molecules known to chemistry. Where did that come from? Before you can even get evolution started. And you have to have the information on the RNA, like a kind of computer program encoded genetically, a computer program to build even the simplest self-replicating cell, which is very complicated. All of those things you've got to have before you can even have evolution. I think the atheist has no answers to this. Where did the universe come from? Why is the fine-tuning so correct? Where did the information for life come from? Let alone, how did we end up being self-aware, able to process thoughts as we are today, intelligent beings? Which one makes most sense of design? Secondly, more briefly, which one makes most sense of human life? Now, I don't want you to misunderstand me here. I'm not saying that Christianity must be true because it's nicer. That's not my argument. But it is nicer. It's worth saying that. But it's more an invitation to live in a way that is consistent with your beliefs. So one of the things I really disliked about religion when I was young was hypocrisy. When I saw people sort of pretending one thing in church or whatever, and then living another way during the week. And if you hate religious hypocrisy, you're in good company because Jesus couldn't stand it. He hated hypocrisy. But I'd never really noticed my own hypocrisy as an atheist because I was saying things about the world that I didn't live by. Because if I really think that my life is entirely accidental and therefore purposeless, well, I didn't live like that. There's a guy called John Gray. He's a popular philosopher. He used to teach at the London School of Economics. He says we need to understand that our species, our life is entirely accidental. We live in a world that is as indifferent to our ambitions as it is to our crimes. The universe of random numbers doesn't care what you hope for, and it doesn't care what you do wrong. During my PhD, I used to sometimes get teased for being the Christian in the department. And in fact, there's at one point, somebody found a Bible study on the photocopier, and the secretary said, "Andrew, this must be yours." I said, "Oh no, it's actually not mine." She goes, "It's not yours? That means there's another one." So, there's this sort of, it's mainly banter. It was in kind of good nature. But I remember one conversation, I was talking to one of the professors, and I said, "Look, if you're right about the universe, why would someone killing you be wrong?" I know it sounds quite disturbing now. This is just intellectual banter. It wasn't said with menace or anything. But why would killing you be wrong? Like, why would that be any different from cutting a grapefruit in half for my breakfast? Because all I'd be doing in both cases is just rearranging the atoms of the universe in a different way. Grapefruit atoms, Kate atoms, same kind of proportion of carbon and so on. And she thought about it for a moment. She said, "Well, the difference is my mother would be upset." I said, "Yeah, but what is upset? Upset is just the decrease in the concentration of a neurotransmitter in the randomly assembled collection of atoms, which is your mother's brain. Like, why does that matter?" It's very hard to give grounds for that if we're just... And of course, I'm not saying that every atheist is a sort of psychopath. I mean, Kate's a very nice person. But the point was, but you can't ground the things that you think matter in this worldview. I mean, Richard Dawkins said so very plainly, didn't he? He said, in a world of genetic forces and replication, he says some people are going to get hurt, other people are going to get lucky, and you won't find any rhyme or reason to it. The universe we observe has precisely the properties we would expect if at bottom there is no good, no evil, nothing but blind, pitiless indifference. It's a very controversial quote, but he was being honest, you see. If it's only random numbers, the random numbers don't care. But of course, we have a sense that the things in the world that do matter, don't we? I mean, kindness matters. Hatred matters. Genocide matters. It's not just a matter of selecting the best gene pool. I mean, that, frighteningly, actually, a lot of early eugenicists were inspired by the idea that all we are is advanced genetic beings. And so they said, well, which is the most advanced genetic being? Oh, the most advanced genetic being is a Caucasian with blonde hair and blue eyes. Let's try and make that the gene pool. Let's eliminate those from the gene pool who are weaker and less than that. And that's a monstrous thing to think. But why do we all think it's monstrous? Well, Paul goes on to say, he says that the God made the world and everything in it. He gives all men life and breath and everything else. And then he says he did it so that we might reach out and find him, though he's not far from each one of us. The idea the God who made us, he's not just some primitive equation. He's not just like the God particle, the Higgs boson or something. He's not just a first cause that press go on the universe. The Bible describes God as powerful, but also personal. Like he wants to know us relationally. Now, how's that going to work? I mean, how are you going to be able to get to know God sort of scientifically? Because, I mean, you can't even eliminate him from the apparatus to take a null reading as a control, can you? He's everywhere. Excuse me, God. God, please could you leave the universe for a moment so we can see if the readings are any different? I mean, how would you do it? I mean, and that's the thing about science, isn't it? Science is a very powerful thing, but it can't tell you everything that's important. So when it comes to getting to know a person, science gets you so far. Imagine you wanted to get to know me. Maybe you don't after this talk, I don't know. But imagine you did want to get to know me, and all you had to go on was what you could work out by scientific experiment. So here I am, I submit myself to your tests. What could you find out? Well, you could do some genomics on me. You could sort of sequence my DNA. You could find out whether I'm likely to die early from any known genetic condition. And actually, I am. I've got genetically super high cholesterol because my dad and my grandfather did. So yeah, you could find out that. Probable cause of death, heart attack, I guess. You could do gas chromatography under my armpit, and you could work out what deodorant I'm wearing and whether it's working right now. You could do scanning electron microscopy on the fibers on my trousers and work out that I got here on the Glasgow subway. Yeah, that's about all, though, isn't it? Those sorts of things. Forensic science. Like, you couldn't tell my name. And you could tell almost nothing of any importance to getting to know me as a person. Like, what makes me laugh? What makes me cry? What I would die for? Who I love? None of those things. I mean, and that's why if you're in a relationship today, I very much doubt that on your first date you said, please, can I take a small scrape of cells from inside your cheek? I'll run some tests. I'll be back with an answer in a couple of weeks. It's not how it works, is it? Because it's not that science doesn't tell you important things. It does. It just doesn't tell you everything. And when it comes to getting to know people, well, how are you going to do that? Well, usually the person's got to introduce themselves or be willing to be known by you. And it's actually the same with God. The Bible says that God is the cause, the creator, the designer. It makes sense of the Big Bang happening at all. It makes sense of the Big Bang happening at the right speed. It makes sense of the DNA having the right information. It makes sense of humans being personal because he's personal, and moral because he's moral, and the fact you can't reduce things to just random numbers because he's not just random numbers. And so we are physical and spiritual and personal. Makes sense of all of that. But when it comes to knowing him, he's got to want to introduce himself. And Paul goes on to say at the end of his little speech, that's what God's done. He wants to introduce himself. He says, we shouldn't think that the divine being is like gold or silver or stone, an image made by human design and skill. It's not that we made gods like, the little ones that you can find in the museums, the ancient pagan little idols, object. No, it's not like that. It's that God made us, and it's time to change our mind about God, to realize that we're in a world that he made, breathing breath that he gives, in a world where he wants to know the people that he made. It's time to change your mind, he says. And then he finishes this way, because God has set a day when he will judge the world with justice by the man he's appointed. He's given proof of this to everyone by raising him from the dead. When they heard about the resurrection of the dead, some of them sneered, but others said, we want to hear more about this. Now, I've talked a lot about Richard Dawkins. He's just retired, did you see, last week? He's the atheist professor of Oxford and the professor of the public understanding of science. Not really what he did, actually. Most of his career was for the public understanding of atheism. He ruthlessly pursued atheism in the name of science. In his book, The God Delusion, he discusses the resurrection of Jesus and then says it cannot have happened being by definition a contradiction of the laws of science. But that isn't how the scientific method works. That is very bad science. Science doesn't decide a theory and then reject all data to the contrary. In fact, most scientific theories, most scientific advances come because of the bit that doesn't quite fit your theory. Well, why is this data different to what we thought? And then you have to revise the theory. You see, if your theory is there is no God, and then your data point is someone came back from the dead, that data point doesn't fit the theory. So you've got two options. You either ignore the data point, or you revise the theory. Richard Dawkins says, well, the resurrection can't have happened because it doesn't fit my theory. It's not good science. Maybe your theory needs to change. Because actually, wouldn't that be a brilliant way of giving us solid evidence that this is true? Like, imagine there really is a God, if you're open to just even that possibility. There's a God that made you, made me. A God who gives us life and breath and everything else. That's why we're here, self-aware, intelligent, processing these sound waves and understanding words. A God who wants to know us. And he wants to know us so much that he came to earth in the person of Jesus Christ. But he really wanted everyone to know that Jesus Christ wasn't just an ordinary person, but really was God coming to earth. And so he did a resurrection. Seems to me quite a good thing to do. Like, if Jesus Christ was God and there was nothing at all unusual about him, I would be more suspicious, wouldn't you? Imagine I would say to you today, oh, you're very lucky to have me tonight. I'm in great demand as a speaker because I'm actually God. At which point, the people who invited me are going to start to get quite nervous and think, who is this guy? No, it's true. I made the universe. And then one of you says in question time, prove it. Prove that you're God. Oh, I can't prove it. Oh, I can't do anything that the rest of you can't do, but trust me, I'm God. Then I would be suspicious. Whereas if somebody really was God walking around on earth, I would expect them to do unusual things. Ordinarily impossible kinds of things. Messing with the laws of the universe that he himself runs, kind of things. Like walking on water. That gives scientists a headache. How did he do that at room temperature? Or multiplying bread to feed 5,000 people. That's difficult. Conservation of matter itself is... I like to think of all the miracles in the Bible, which one is the scientifically most messed up? Probably the feeding of the 5,000, actually, if you think about it. Or there's one where in the Bible where the sun stands still. That's really pretty crazy. I've got a Christian astrophysicist friend. I said, what would happen if that happened? He said, a lot of very bad things would happen if the sun stood still. Unless, of course, God just adjusted the rules, because the God who sustains the world, who made the world, if he really wanted to get your attention, it's not that he does miracles all the time. That's the whole point of miracles, isn't it? They're very rare because God likes to do things in an orderly way. That's why science is possible. Let's understand the intelligible design of an intelligible creator. But if, as a one-off, really exceptionally, God wanted to get your attention, what better than a resurrection? And of course, if Jesus did rise from the dead, well, atheism's got to go. Because the theory doesn't fit with the data. You've got to get rid of the theory and switch it for a different theory. Here are two worldviews. This is where the real conflict is. Not between science and Christian faith, but between two different philosophies. Naturalism, all we are is matter and chance. Or Christianity, there's a God, a real God who made us and sustains us and wants to know us. And which one makes most sense of the facts? Which one makes most sense of design? I'll do it for the last time tonight. How come the Big Bang went bang at the right speed? And then there was RNA with information and people and self-awareness. Where did that come from? It makes most sense of design. Which one makes most sense of human purpose, morality, the sense that killing someone isn't the same as cutting in half a grapefruit? And finally, which one makes most sense of Jesus Christ and his resurrection from the dead? Only one theory fits that data, I suggest. And so far from science disproving God, I'd argue that all the data we get from science only fits with there being a God who wants to know us personally today. Thank you for listening so attentively, and in a minute you're going to ask questions, but I really appreciate your close attention. Thank you.
And thank you very much, Andrew, for that. Very, very helpful and thought-provoking. So far, we only have 6 questions on Slido. So it would be good just to spend a minute or two, maybe just chatting or thinking for yourself. If you've got the QR code, you might need to scroll to the bottom, and then you don't have to sign up for an account, you just put your question. Or if you have a look at the questions and vote for questions you like, then we'll get to the sort of the most popular questions, and we'll start that in a couple of minutes. All right? Okay, we'll make a start. You can keep asking questions if you would like to. I'm just going to go from the most popular and just kind of work our way down, and we'll see how we go for time. We'll spend about 15, 20 minutes or so, see how much energy we've got. And you, Andrew. The first question looks like quite a challenging one. How did God come to be?
So the Bible says that God is eternal. So he's always been. He was there before time, before space, before anything. And that's the teaching of the Old Testament and the New Testament. God is eternal. Of course, the thing about eternal things is you don't need to explain them. Do you remember my illustration of the music stand? Or I did something else. Why is that chair still there? Well, the chair's still there because nothing's happened to the chair. You don't have to explain things that haven't changed. Why is God here? Well, he's here because he was here. Why was he here? Well, he was here because he was here before that. So eternal things, you don't need to explain. But things that have changed, you do need an explanation for. You need a cause. So if the universe had been eternal, most scientists thought the universe was eternal 150 years ago. If it had been eternal, you wouldn't have to explain where it came from. It's just always been here. But now that people think that the universe had a beginning in time, I mean, basically scientists have come to agree with the Bible that there was a beginning for the universe. Anything with a beginning needs to have a cause. So God doesn't have a beginning. God has no cause. The universe does have a beginning. It's now universally accepted, so it needs to have a cause. So in that sense, there's a fundamental difference between God, who's eternal, and the universe, which had a beginning in time.
Okay, thank you. Okay, the next question is, the resurrection obviously would be a miracle, but how can I believe any miracle if I've never ever seen one?
Yeah, I mean, miracles have to be very, very rare. So, imagine 1% of people who die get resurrected. Okay, and that, you just change your definitions of how biology works and how death works. And, you wouldn't bury people until you're pretty careful about it for a few weeks maybe after their death or something. But if Jesus rose from the dead in a universe where 1% of people rise from the dead, that wouldn't be very significant. But if Jesus rose from the dead in a universe where it's well established that this just does not ever happen, then everyone's going to take notice. Right? The whole point of a miracle is a departure from the normal, from the ordinary. So I'm not arguing for miracles all the time. If miracles happen all the time, you couldn't really do science, or at least science would be different because it would build the miracle in. I'm saying science observes and describes the uniform, the typical, the ongoing, consistent way that the universe works, because God upholds the universe in a very regular way, except for a handful of occasions where he does something very, very striking so that everyone notices. And by the way, this isn't just a sort of modern scientific person thing. I used to be quite a snob about this. I thought, people in the Bible were so gullible, they're so primitive, because they didn't even realize that resurrection is impossible. Of course they realized resurrection is impossible. That's why when they went to the tomb on Easter Sunday and they found the body was gone, and they were very confused and surprised. And they always probably rose from the dead then. And then when they met him alive, they were very frightened, which is what I would do. When Jesus walks on water, you don't have to know that much about physics to know that isn't normal, especially if you're a fisherman, right? They get out of boats all the time. And then when they see Jesus walking on the surface, they are very scared. So that they react in ways that people who understand enough of the science to know that this should not ordinarily happens. Now, the question is, how can you know? The answer is there's all sorts of ways that we know things apart from seeing them for ourselves. So I believe there's a country called Peru, and I know there's a Paddington film set there. That's not really enough evidence, is there? But I've got friends from Peru, and I trust them when they say there was a thing called Peru. I believe that there were gas chambers at Auschwitz. I wasn't there, but I believe it because somebody told me. I believe in lots of scientific experiments that I didn't myself do because somebody else did them, and I trusted they're right above them. So there's all sorts of reasons why we trust things that other people report to us. Of course, you shouldn't be gullible. You've got to have good evidence, good reason to trust the person who's telling you. You need to know whether they lied or not. But actually, this is the basis of most court cases. There's very few court cases decided entirely on the basis of forensics. There's witnesses, and you've got to check whether you can trust the witnesses, and then if you can, then that is enough in the country we live in to put people away for prison. In fact, I'll give you this little trailer. I've got a book that I co-wrote at the back called "Are You 100% Sure That You Want to Be an Agnostic?" And just to make you want to pick one up, it contains the story of when I got arrested a few years ago and the court case that followed, and the kind of evidence that it was based on. And we do accept that kind. You need to have solid evidence, and you need to be able to trust the witnesses who were there. But very briefly, there was a whole lot of people who were sure that they'd seen Jesus alive after he was dead, and the people who were sure about that didn't become rich. But they were persecuted and in some cases killed, and they wouldn't change their story. Now, this makes absolute sense to me if it happened, and it makes no sense to me if it didn't. So if Jesus didn't rise from the dead, the idea that people would make up the fact that he did and then be killed for it doesn't make sense to me. People give up their lives for something that isn't untrue all the time. Crazy ideologies, people will die for them. Like, you'll fly an aeroplane into a skyscraper because you're sure that you're going to go to paradise. I think that's a lie. I don't think they are in paradise. But they thought they would go to paradise. People die for things that they think are true. But no one would die for something that they knew wasn't true. The idea that they think, we know Jesus isn't really alive, but we'll die for saying that he is, doesn't make any sense. But if Jesus defeated death, and you knew that he defeated death, it's very rational that you would then die for him because he can defeat death. So anyway, those sorts of things. You haven't seen it yourself, but there's people who have. So that was long-winded. I'll try and be quicker to get through more of these questions.
No, that's great. Thank you. Very helpful. I'm intrigued about the court case. Okay. What are your thoughts about extraterrestrial life? I appreciate Genesis 1 is what we may know only about our planetary world. Two things about this. Number one, I don't really know. There could be. I think there probably isn't. And let me say why. I don't really know. There could be. There probably isn't.
certainly this planet is of peculiar importance to God. So, cosmologically, one solar system amongst one galaxy amongst many galaxies. And I mean, we're tiny in a vast universe. But if God made us and then visited this planet in person and died on a cross so that we could be forgiven, gosh, he's really invested in this backwater part of the universe, isn't he? I mean, he disproportionately he cares about what's going on here. If God himself would come here and visit here. It's the first thing to say. The second thing to say is, if you're an atheist, I think you have to believe in extraterrestrial life. And I'll explain why. You basically have to think that it could have happened by accident. And if it happened by accident once here, it would have happened by accident elsewhere. I think life is absolutely not by accident, and I think it's extraordinarily unlikely for it to happen by accident. And so it needn't have happened anywhere apart from the place where God chose it to happen, and that could just be here. So that's the other part of the answer.
Great. Okay, thank you. I'm going to suggest we do 2 more questions. So if you'd really like to get a question answered, can you please vote? And I'm just going to take the top one just now. I take it this is from maybe something that you said earlier. Do you think evolution didn't happen? How does science contradict that?
Yeah, I didn't say that in the talk, and I do think evolution happens. I mean, it's obvious, isn't it, just from COVID. So, all those variants, Omicron, I remember that one, and all the other, I forget them all now because it's a blur. But, a virus evolves to be resistant to certain treatments and certain antibodies, and it's always mutating and being... I mean, that happens all the time. So, obviously, that's true. I believe in natural selection, evolution. What I'm saying I don't believe in is that is a sufficient explanation for the existence of this. Certainly it's not. And so I'm just challenging the idea that evolution is your one-word answer as an atheist to the whole problem of design, because it really can't do that job. Yes, viruses can evolve to their environment. That is not the same thing as going from a universe non-existence to existence at the right speed, having RNA, having cells that can copy each other, having self-aware, intelligent people understanding sound waves. I mean, evolution cannot do that for you. And of course, if you're an atheist, it's all you've got, isn't it? So you go, well, evolution. And I was just saying it is inadequate. It happens, yeah, it cannot do the whole explanatory job for you. That's what I'm arguing. And Richard Buggs, I say, my professor friend, argued that much more thoroughly. So I presume it was recorded last year, and if not, he certainly has done talks on the internet that it's recorded. So he's a real expert on evolution, arguing exactly that much better than I can, saying, evolution, yeah, good mechanism. This is how far it can get you. It cannot get you that far, basically.
Okay, thank you. Right, we'll finish with this question. So I'll just look at the top. Okay, one jump to the top there. How does Adam and Eve fit into the whole explanation? Doesn't that contradict everything science would tell us about evolution, fossils, etc.?
So the question is referring to the Bible saying that we come from a single ancestor couple called Adam and Eve. And it was referred to in the passage I read from the Apostle Paul in Athens. So he said, from one man, God made all the nations that they should habit the whole earth. Doesn't that contradict science? It depends on what you mean, doesn't it? So is it genetically impossible that this happened? No. Actually, again, I lean on Richard Buggs. He's actually done some work on this in Nature, the scientific journal, on this exact question. But it's kind of an obvious argument. If you know about anything about human DNA, there's 4 letters in the DNA alphabet. So at any particular point on your genome, you have 1 of 4 letters. But you also have 2 strands of your DNA, and they have opposite letters. So these are a pair. So all you need is 2 lots of DNA to have every single possible letter. And you've got 2 parents, you've got a mum and a dad. So between the 2 genomes of 2 people, you can get all possible genetic variation. Now, we don't have that, do we? Because your mum and dad aren't genetically that different from each other. But just for the sake of argument, imagine that my dad was a sort of 7 foot tall black guy, and my mum was a 4 foot tall white woman. And in every way they were diverse. They were diverse in terms of ethnicity, height, like maximally diverse. Then their children, you actually could get 4 children way, way more diverse than any current human parents have children. You can't, it's theoretically genetically possible if the humans are, so it is not a problem to get all of current genetic diversity into 2 people. That's quite easy to do. And then the question is, what do we know about human history and where did we derive from? And I guess details are quite sketchy. But is it impossible scientific? No. Does it contradict some prevailing notions in an atheistic scientific community? Yes. I think that's okay for me. Yeah, so it's a murky area of our past. I don't think the Bible view is impossible. And in fact, some good evidence. I mean, you might know about mitochondrial Eve, if you come across that idea. The idea that we have a single ancestor as derived from our mitochondrial DNA. That fits quite well with the Bible data. So yeah, I think the Bible's true. I think science is quite sketchy in this area. It's very partial. But I do think there's a way through where the two can be reconciled, yeah.
Great. Thank you.
Thank you.
Guys, before Andrew sits down, could we just give him a well-deserved round of applause, please? Thank you very much.
Thanks.
Andrew, thank you for coming tonight. Thank you for your presentation and just the thought-provoking part that was and very clearly explained. Thank you for that. Thank you also for, it's not easy to just have those random questions coming. Thank you for being so articulate in delivery of those and for your time. Thank you very much. Thank you for coming tonight. I hope you enjoyed it. I hope you thought it was useful. I'm sure you thought it was interesting and certainly lots to think about. If you don't normally come to church, I would like to just say that we have a number of events over on Christmas. We have a couple of carol services that are particularly open and welcome to any guests on the 8th and the 7 plus 8, 15th of December. So you're very welcome to come to that at 7 o'clock. But also, if you've come tonight and you are just thinking about faith and what it means for you and you'd like an environment to be able to talk about this more, then we run a course called the Life Course. And it starts in January, and there's 4 Wednesday evenings in January where you have a meal. It's fairly relaxed in terms of just sitting with your pals and chatting. And if it's something you'd like to explore more for yourself, then we'd really welcome you to come along to that and invite you to do that. So please think about that if that's of interest. And lastly, Andrew mentioned his book. I don't think he's plugging it for sales. I think it's free. But if you would like to read more about that, the court case or just other arguments that he's talking about, then please feel free to pick that up as you leave tonight. But thank you for coming. I hope you enjoyed it and hopefully see you again. All right. Good night.